You do not prove your purpose with excitement. You prove it with return. You do not prove your ambition with one powerful morning, one emotional promise, one inspired decision, or one speech about what you are going to become. You prove it when the feeling cools, when the room gets quiet, when nobody is watching, when the work is still plain and you come back anyway. That is the dividing line. The world is full of men who can start with fire. It is starving for men who can continue with law. Anybody can feel powerful for an hour. Anybody can say, "This is the day my life changes." Anybody can be fierce in the heat of a moment. But when tomorrow comes, when the body is tired, when the task feels ordinary, when no applause is waiting, when the first struggle appears, then the truth steps into the room. Were you serious, or were you merely stirred? Consistency is the proof that you are serious. That sentence is not soft, and it is not meant to be, because many men love the image of being dedicated more than the discipline of actually becoming dependable. They love the sound of commitment, the posture of ambition, the emotion of a fresh beginning. But they do not love the unromantic burden of repetition. They do not love the 5th day, the 50th day, the ordinary Tuesday, the quiet morning, the plain evening, the hour when the work no longer flatters them and yet still asks to be done. That is where seriousness is measured, not in the moment that feels powerful, but in the pattern that survives after power stops feeling dramatic. This is why inconsistency is never a small flaw. It is evidence. Evidence that a man still lives too much by weather. Evidence that his standard is still negotiable. Evidence that he is still waiting for emotion to carry what only discipline can carry. A man says he wants wealth, but he saves only when fear gets loud enough. A man says he wants mastery, but he practices only when inspiration happens to visit. A man says he wants peace, but he guards his mind only on the days when anxiety has already done damage. A man says he wants strength, but he trains only when he feels ashamed of his weakness. That is not seriousness. That is reactivity. Serious men do not wait for pain to remind them who they said they wanted to be. They build patterns strong enough to outlast their moods. Understand this clearly. Consistency is not boring. It is expensive. It costs a man his excuses. It costs him his drama. It costs him the luxury of saying, "I meant well," while his results continue exposing his lack of structure. Consistency is the death of romantic self-deception. It does not care that your intentions were noble. It asks what you repeated. It does not care that you had one excellent week. It asks what you became known for in your own life. It does not care how loudly you declared a turning point. It asks whether your hand kept the work moving after the declaration grew old. This is why consistency is one of the most honest judges in the world. It exposes whether a man is truly governed or merely easily excited. And the world is filled with easily excited men. They are moved by speeches, books, sermons, failures, fears, ambitions, and temporary bursts of discomfort. They make vows. They create plans. They feel new. Then life becomes plain again. The body gets tired. The reward delays. The old habits begin speaking softly. The work asks for another day of obedience. And because their whole effort was built on intensity instead of structure, they begin slipping. Then they call themselves unlucky, discouraged, overwhelmed, confused, or still figuring things out. No. In many cases, they are simply undisciplined in repetition. They have not yet become the kind of person who can keep a thing alive after the feeling of beginning has faded. That is why consistency is such a rare and powerful trait. It is proof that your standards are not temporary. It is proof that your desire has been organized. It is proof that your promises have become more than decoration. It is proof that the future has started becoming more important to you than today's comfort. A consistent man does not have to keep telling the world he is serious. His habits speak. His hours speak. His results begin speaking. Even before the larger outcomes arrive, there is already weight in his life because repetition has started building substance under everything he touches. Now let us strike at the heart of the matter. Most men fail not because the goal is too difficult, but because they keep restarting. Restarting the routine. Restarting the budget. Restarting the habit. Restarting the discipline. Restarting the plan. Restarting the dream. Restarting the same self-conversation after every collapse. They are always in the beginning. Always about to. Always getting back on track. Always this time for real. That pattern is one of the most expensive in human life. It creates the illusion of movement without the fruit of continuity. A man may spend years feeling as though he is trying, when in truth he is living in cycles of ignition and collapse. And cycles do not build great things. Chains do. One link, then another, unbroken enough that strength can begin traveling through the whole line. This is why the real question is never only, can you start? The real question is, can you keep coming back? Can you keep the promise on a day that feels ordinary? Can you still do the work when no one would blame you for postponing? Can you keep the budget when the world offers you 10 reasons to feel entitled? Can you remain faithful to the habit when you are no longer impressed by yourself for having started it? Can you carry the standard beyond the point where it feels emotionally rewarding? That is seriousness, because at that point the lower self has lost one of its favorite weapons, the claim that discipline must always feel meaningful in order to be worth obeying. Serious men learn that much of what matters feels plain while it is becoming powerful. A seed does not look impressive underground. A brick does not look magnificent alone. A single disciplined hour does not look like a legacy. A saved amount does not look like freedom. A repeated training session does not look like transformation. A cleanly spoken truth does not look like authority. But all of these things, repeated, become their larger form. The weak man despises repetition because he cannot yet see the future inside the little act. The strong man respects repetition because he understands compounding. He knows that the life he wants will not be built by one grand moment of brilliance, but by smaller acts done so many times that they stop looking small altogether. That is why consistency is one of the purest forms of faith, not vague optimism. Practical faith, faith that says, this matters even today. This matters even if the reward is not visible yet. This matters even if it feels ordinary. This matters enough to be done again. A man who has this faith becomes almost unstoppable because he is no longer relying on daily emotional reward. He is building under law. He is not asking each morning whether his standards still apply. They apply. The hour still belongs to the work. The money still belongs to the plan. The mouth still belongs to truth. The body still belongs to discipline. The day still belongs to purpose. This subtleness is what gives consistency its force. Now let us speak honestly about why so many resist it. Consistency is confronting. It reveals your actual loyalties. If you are consistent in weakness, then you are loyal to weakness more than you are loyal to change. If you are consistent in waste, then waste is not an accident. It is a ruler. If you are consistent in delay, then delay has more authority than your stated ambition. This is why many men would rather not look too closely at their patterns. Patterns remove the perfume from excuses. A man can explain one bad day. He can explain one poor choice. He can explain one indulgent week. But when the same failure keeps showing up over months and years, explanations start sounding thin. Then only truth remains. This is what you repeat. This is what you obey. This is what truly rules you. So if you want to know what you worship, look at what you repeat. If you want to know what you actually value, look at what keeps receiving your best force. If you want to know whether you are serious, look at what survives the loss of excitement. This is why consistency is not merely a strategy. It is a mirror. It shows you who you really are when the stage is gone. And if the mirror reveals weakness, good. Better to know the truth than to keep admiring a false image of yourself while your life stays unchanged. Now, some will say, but I am not perfect. Good. Perfection is not the standard here. Return is. A serious man may stumble, but he does not disappear. He may lose a day, but he does not surrender the weak. He may make a poor decision, but he does not kneel before shame and let it become a second failure. He returns, quickly, cleanly, without drama. This is another form of consistency that weak men ignore. They imagine consistency means flawless performance. No, it means loyal continuity. It means the pattern survives even when the man has a poor hour or a poor day. The chain is not broken forever because one link felt strain. The man repairs it and keeps going. That is why serious people become less theatrical with themselves. They stop turning every stumble into a story. They stop saying, I ruined everything. They stop saying, this always happens. They stop using one weak moment as proof of permanent identity. Instead, they say, return now. Correct it now. The standard remains. This makes them powerful because they lose less life to emotional aftermath. Weak men waste enormous time recovering from avoidable collapses made larger by a dramatic self-talk. Strong men interrupt the decline. They do not let one failure become an atmosphere. This matters because consistency is not only built in action, it is built in recovery. If you can recover consistently, you become far more dangerous than the man who is only strong while everything is going well. A man who stays disciplined in ideal conditions is merely comfortable. A man who can return after disappointment, fatigue, criticism, or boredom is becoming formidable. Life trusts such a man with more because he is no longer easy to knock off center. He has learned how to re-enter order quickly. Now let us go deeper into another truth. Consistency is proof because it reveals whether your identity is changing or only your intentions. A man who keeps saying he is becoming someone new but continues repeating the same old weak patterns is not yet becoming new in any meaningful sense. He has adopted inspiring language, perhaps. He has changed his self-description, perhaps. But identity is proved in repetition. If you are consistently rising early, consistently saving, consistently building, consistently telling the truth, consistently keeping your word, then identity is changing. If not, you are still living under older rulers, no matter how beautiful your plans sound. This is why serious men become less interested in impressive declarations and more interested in durable patterns. They stop asking, how can I feel more motivated? And start asking, how can I make obedience more normal? That is the shift. Normal matters. What becomes normal begins shaping the whole tone of the life. If waste is normal, the future will always be taxed. If excuses are normal, progress will remain fragile. If late starts are normal, pressure will keep owning the weak. But if discipline becomes normal, if beginning on time becomes normal, if the standard becomes normal, if saving becomes normal, if saying no becomes normal, then the life becomes much easier to respect. Respect is another reward of consistency. Not public respect first. Inner respect. A man begins trusting his own hand. He says he will do something, and he watches himself do it. Again and again. The mind records this. The conscience records this. Confidence grows from it. Not the loud confidence of performance, but the quiet confidence of evidence. A man who has evidence does not need as much emotional encouragement because he has memory. He remembers that he returns. He remembers that he finishes. He remembers that he can stay with a thing after the novelty leaves. That memory gives him steadiness, and steadiness is more valuable than excitement. Excitement may draw the line on the page, but steadiness writes the chapter. Excitement may open the account, but steadiness grows the reserve. Excitement may begin the training, but steadiness changes the body. Excitement may produce the promise, but steadiness makes the promise respectable. If you had to choose, always choose steadiness. Excitement is a guest. Steadiness is a builder. This is why consistency is one of the highest forms of self-respect. It says, my future deserves more than my occasional best. My future deserves patterns. My future deserves laws. My future deserves a life in which right things happen often enough to become the tone of the whole. Weak men offer their future scattered gestures. Strong men offer it reliable structures. One is romantic. The other is fruitful. Now, because this is true, you must become suspicious of every part of yourself that is still addicted to fresh starts more than faithful continuation. Fresh starts feel wonderful. They flatter pride because they make a man feel new before he has yet paid the cost of change. But continuation is where the truth lives. Continuation asks, will you still show up when this no longer feels like a new chapter? Will you still obey when no one is impressed that you are still doing this? Will you still keep the promise when it has become part of the plainness of your day? If yes, then the thing is becoming real. So stop asking whether you feel serious. Feelings lie. Ask what you repeat. Ask what survives fatigue. Ask what survives boredom. Ask what survives the absence of praise. Ask what survives after a weak day. Those are the marks of seriousness. Those are the signs that your life is beginning to build under law instead of under mood. And if the truth reveals inconsistency, do not collapse. Do not dramatize. Do not turn one honest discovery into another excuse to delay. Use the truth. Begin reducing the distance between what you say and what you repeat. Shorten the gap. Keep one promise daily. Protect 1 hour daily. Save one amount daily or weekly. Return 1 day faster after weakness. Build one chain long enough that you start respecting it too much to break it cheaply. This is how consistency is born, not through one giant transformation, but through repeated loyalty to what matters. Because in the end, consistency is the proof that you are serious, not the speech, not the vision, not the plan, not the emotional vow made in a powerful hour. The proof is in the pattern. The proof is in the return. The proof is in the law that remains standing when the thrill of beginning has already left the room. And the man who builds that kind of proof no longer has to persuade the world that he means business. His life begins carrying the kind of quiet weight that makes the matter unmistakable. And once a man understands that consistency is the real proof, he begins seeing why so many promising lives remain unfinished. It is not because the people in those lives lacked intelligence. It is not because they lacked ideas, passion, or even desire. It is because they kept treating seriousness like an emotion instead of a discipline. They felt serious on the days when the dream looked bright, when the pain of staying the same felt unbearable, when a fresh plan made them feel powerful, when a new month or a new week gave them the illusion of a clean beginning. But life is not built by what you feel at the edge of a new beginning. Life is built by what you keep doing after the beginning loses its shine. That is where consistency stops being a nice word and becomes a ruthless judge. Because the truth is simple. Enthusiasm introduces you. Consistency defines you. You may impress people with one strong effort. You may even impress yourself with one focused day, one hard week, one season of visible improvement. But the question that determines your future is not whether you can be excellent briefly. It is whether you can be reliable repeatedly. A man who can be brilliant in flashes but weak in patterns remains dangerous only to himself. He will keep seeing what is possible, touching it for a moment, then dropping it because his inner life has not yet been trained to carry ordinary obedience for long stretches of time. That kind of man lives in torment because his potential keeps appearing just long enough to expose what his inconsistency is costing him. Now, let us strike directly at the root of that inconsistency. Inconsistency usually comes from divided loyalty. A man says he wants one thing, but he still loves something that works against it. He says he wants wealth, but he still loves reckless spending. He says he wants peace, but he still loves emotional drama. He says he wants mastery, but he still loves comfort more than practice. He says he wants discipline, but he still loves the freedom to negotiate with himself every day. This is why his life keeps splitting apart. He is speaking one future and feeding another. And because he is divided, he cannot repeat the right thing long enough for the right thing to become powerful. That must change if success is ever going to become more than a private fantasy. A serious man reaches the point where he stops asking, "What do I feel like doing today?" and starts asking, "What does the life I want require today?" That question is cleaner. Harder, yes, but cleaner. It shifts authority away from mood and back to law. Mood is temporary. Law can be repeated. Mood makes beautiful speeches and weak patterns. Law creates plain days and strong futures. The world does not give lasting reward to the man who feels right once in a while. It gives room, eventually, to the man who can build the same strength into Tuesday, Thursday, and the gray morning when nothing special seems to be happening. This is why consistency is not a personality trait reserved for a few lucky people. It is a trained agreement between a man and his own standards. He decides what matters. He builds his life around it. Then he stops renegotiating the matter every time comfort, fatigue, disappointment, or distraction make an argument. The average man lives in constant internal debate. Should I begin now? Should I save this? Should I let this slide? Should I keep the promise today? That inner debate drains force. It makes the life unstable. The consistent man reduces debate. He decides once and obeys often. The morning belongs to the work. The hand belongs to the budget. The mind belongs to what strengthens. The standard remains. This simplicity is one of the highest forms of power. Now, one of the greatest enemies of consistency is the need for emotional proof. Many men want to feel progress every day. They want the work to keep paying them in excitement, visible growth, praise, and momentum. But real growth often becomes very plain while it is strengthening. The body changes slowly. The craft deepens slowly. Savings grow slowly. Trust is earned slowly. Reputation is built slowly. If a man cannot tolerate the slow stage, he will keep interrupting what could have matured. He will switch plans, loosen standards, seek novelty, create unnecessary change, and call it staying flexible, when in truth he is just unable to endure the ordinary pace at which real things become strong. That is why the disciplined man becomes less addicted to fresh excitement and more loyal to repeated correctness. He learns to respect the plain day. He learns to work when the work feels like work. He learns to save when saving feels unimpressive. He learns to practice when practice feels repetitive. He learns that the value of an act is not measured by how exciting it feels, but by what it becomes when repeated. This is one of the deepest mental shifts in any serious life. The man stops asking, "Does this feel big enough today?" and starts asking, "What does this become if I keep doing it?" That question reveals the hidden power of consistency. A page a day becomes a manuscript. A little money preserved becomes margin. A repeated conversation done with honesty becomes trust. A disciplined hour becomes mastery over time. A guarded appetite becomes strength of character. A routine kept long enough becomes identity. These are not poetic ideas. They are laws. Yet most men live in rebellion against these laws because the early stages look too small to satisfy their pride. Pride always wants dramatic results from modest efforts. Consistency humbles pride by forcing it to respect accumulation. It says, "Do this again, and again, and again." The weak man gets offended by repetition. The wise man understands that repetition is what turns the invisible into the undeniable. And now we must speak of another enemy, one that hides behind intelligence: overthinking. Overthinking destroys consistency because it turns every simple act into an emotional referendum. A man who should simply begin starts analyzing his mood, his circumstances, the timing, the conditions, the quality of the plan, what others are doing, whether this is the perfect approach, whether he should revise first, whether he is truly aligned with the task. All the while, the work sits undone. This is not depth. It is often a refined form of avoidance. The consistent man grows suspicious of all thinking that keeps him from the next obvious act. He values clarity, yes. But once clarity is sufficient, he moves. He does not keep reopening decisions that law has already settled. That is what makes him harder to stop. He is not constantly reinventing himself. He is not always starting over. He is not always in need of a dramatic reset. He is building chains. One day linked to another. One act linked to another. One discipline linked to another. Chains matter because they produce continuity. And continuity creates compounding. The man who keeps breaking the chain may still be talented, but he remains expensive to trust. Even he cannot trust himself fully because he has watched himself disappear too many times after promising great things. But when he begins preserving continuity, something powerful happens. He starts respecting his own word. And self-respect is one of the richest rewards consistency can produce, because self-respect is not mainly a feeling. It is memory. Memory of kept promises. Memory of mornings protected. Memory of appetites denied. Memory of returning after drift. Memory of work finished. Memory of not turning weakness into a week-long drama. The mind records these things. It begins revising its estimate of the man. He is no longer just another person who talks magnificently and fades quietly. He is becoming someone who remains. That memory becomes confidence. Not loud confidence, clean confidence. The kind that does not need to announce itself because it has evidence behind it. This matters more than people think. A man with evidence no longer depends so heavily on outside encouragement. He still appreciates support, yes, but he is no longer starving for it. He has a quieter source of strength now. He knows what he has kept. He knows what he has overcome in private. He knows what he has repeated when no applause was available. That knowledge steadies him. It makes him less vulnerable to silence, less desperate for visible proof, and less likely to abandon the process just because the world has not yet fully noticed what he is building. Now let us move deeper. Consistency also reveals what you truly worship. That is not a phrase people like to hear, but it is true. Whatever you consistently make time for, sacrifice for, protect, repeat, and excuse, that thing has become sacred in your life. If you consistently protect the first hour for your highest work, then your future matters deeply to you. If you consistently spend on what soothes your insecurity, then comfort or appearance has too much power in your life. If you consistently return to resentment, then resentment has become one of your inward loyalties. If you consistently train, build, save, speak truth, and keep your word, then discipline has begun becoming sacred. This is why patterns tell the truth. They reveal what speeches can hide. The weak man fears this truth because it strips away his image. He can no longer say, "I value this," while living in total contradiction to it. He can no longer pretend that one occasional effort cancels weeks of disobedience. He must face what is actually repeated. This is good, hard but good, because until a man sees what he is actually repeating, he cannot change his life intelligently. Once he sees it, however, he has a real starting point. He can stop flattering himself and begin reforming himself. And reforming always starts by making the desired behavior easier to repeat and the undesired behavior harder to reach. This is where many fail, because they rely entirely on willpower. Willpower matters, but it should not be forced to carry the whole structure by itself. The serious man also uses design. He arranges his mornings. He prepares his work. He limits access to what weakens him. He creates order in the environment. He decides in advance what gets money, what gets time, what gets energy, what gets no vote at all. This design makes consistency more likely because it reduces the number of moments in which weakness gets to bargain for power. This is especially important in the first and last parts of the day. The beginning and end of the day shape more than most people admit. A weak beginning often creates a reactive day. A careless ending often creates a weak tomorrow. So the man who is serious begins guarding both. He does not let the day start in drift. He does not let the evening dissolve into pointless leakage. He begins treating the edges of the day like borders. That alone will strengthen a life more than many dramatic resolutions ever could. Now, one of the greatest misconceptions about consistency is that it means lifeless sameness. Not true. Consistency does not kill life. It protects what matters from chaos. It gives the mind room to think, the soul room to settle, the craft room to deepen, and the future room to grow. Inconsistent men often mistake their own disorder for freedom. They say they want spontaneity, variety, and flexibility. Fine. But too often what they call freedom is simply unreliability in a more flattering coat. They are free to drift, free to waste, free to delay, free to collapse. That is not freedom. Real freedom is being so governed that you are no longer constantly sabotaged by your lower self. The consistent man becomes freer over time because less of his life is being stolen by repair. He has fewer unnecessary crises, fewer apologies to himself, fewer days wasted in recovery from foolishness, fewer emotional collapses after predictable compromises. That saved energy becomes available for better work, deeper thought, stronger relationships, and long-term building. In that sense, consistency does not make life smaller. It makes life more usable. It turns scattered force into directed power. Now, here's a very important point. Consistency is not measured only by what you do when you feel strong. It is measured by what survives fatigue, boredom, criticism, and slow results. Anyone can act with force when the path feels new. The test comes when the road gets plain. Can you still show up? Can you still begin without needing the old thrill? Can you still keep the promise when it no longer flatters your identity to do so? Can you still work when the outcome is quiet? That is seriousness. The man who can do that is no longer at the mercy of emotional weather. He is becoming a law unto his own day. This is why I say again, consistency is the proof that you are serious. Not because perfection is required, but because repetition reveals loyalty. A loyal man returns. A loyal man keeps the standard alive. A loyal man does not disappear because the process became ordinary. He may bend, but he returns. He may grow tired, but he returns. He may have a poor day, but he does not surrender the life to one poor day. He returns. That return is one of the most sacred forms of discipline because it proves the thing is becoming part of identity instead of just part of mood. And that is what you must build now. Not grand self-descriptions, not dramatic bursts, not inspiring speeches given to yourself on the edge of another new start. Build return, build pattern, build chain, build continuity. Build the kind of life where the right thing happens often enough that it begins shaping the whole atmosphere of your existence. That is how seriousness becomes visible. That is how discipline becomes trustworthy. That is how the future begins recognizing that your ambition is not a performance. It is a law. So if you want to know where you truly stand, do not ask what you intend. Ask what you repeat. Ask what stays alive when no one praises it. Ask what still happens when the day is ordinary. Ask what remains after the thrill of beginning has died. Those answers will tell you whether you are merely interested, temporarily stirred, or genuinely serious. And if the truth stings, good. Use it. Build from it. Reduce the gap between what you say and what you repeat. Because once that gap starts closing, the life changes fast, not through drama, but through the silent power of a man who has finally become loyal to what matters often enough that his own days begin carrying the undeniable proof of seriousness. Once a man begins repeating the right things long enough to call himself consistent, he meets a harder test than beginning, a harder test than excitement, and in many ways a harder test than suffering. He meets the test of the ordinary season. This is where weak ambition dies and real seriousness is finally revealed. Because it is one thing to be disciplined when the goal is fresh in your imagination, when the pain of staying the same is still burning in your chest, when your new routine feels noble, clean, and full of promise. It is another thing entirely to remain loyal when the work becomes plain, when progress becomes quiet, when the day looks almost like every other day, and when the mind begins whispering that one missed effort, one soft choice, one careless hour, one broken chain does not matter. That whisper has ruined more futures than open failure ever has. Open failure at least sounds an alarm. Ordinary compromise enters in soft shoes and sits down at the table like an old friend. That is why consistency must grow beyond passion and become identity. If it remains only a habit you admire, you will eventually abandon it when the process stops flattering you. But if it becomes part of who you are, then the whole matter changes. You no longer ask whether you feel like doing what matters. You understand that this is what your life does now. This is what your mornings belong to. This is what your standards require. This is how your hand behaves with money. This is how your mind responds to distraction. This is how your mouth speaks under pressure. This is how you recover after a weak hour. You do not reopen the issue every day because the issue has already been settled by law. And that is what weak men cannot stand. Law. They want the right to renegotiate every standard every morning according to mood, convenience, appetite, weather, praise, criticism, boredom, fatigue, or whatever little emotional ruler has risen for the day. They do not want a life. They want options. They want the freedom to be serious when it feels meaningful and loose when the process becomes ordinary. But success does not trust men like that for long. A life built on renegotiated standards becomes a life built on sand. 1 week strong, 1 week soft. 1 month disciplined, 1 month vague. 1 season focused, 1 season distracted. Nothing deep can be built where the floor is always moving. So now we must speak of the central enemy of consistency in the mature stage, hidden disloyalty. Not open rebellion, hidden disloyalty. A man still says he wants the future he once named, but he has quietly begun becoming careless with the actions the future requires. He still admires discipline, but he is no longer protecting the small laws that create it. He still wants growth, but he is feeding comfort more often than truth. He still says the right words, but his pattern has started slipping. This is where a man must become severe with himself in the cleanest way. He must ask, where have I begun tolerating what I once corrected quickly? Where has my standard become casual? Where am I speaking with seriousness but living with softness? Those questions are painful. Good. Pain that reveals drift is one of life's mercies. Because drift is deadly precisely because it rarely feels deadly at first. It feels like rest, like harmless flexibility, like one small exception, like deserved ease, like a day off, like a little reward, like a loose hour that surely cannot matter. But repeated often enough, drift becomes atmosphere, and atmosphere is stronger than occasional effort. This is why some men work hard and still cannot get ahead. Their effort is real, but their atmosphere keeps betraying it. Their routines are too loose. Their thoughts are too undisciplined. Their company is too soft. Their evenings are too wasteful. Their speech is too careless. Their money is too emotional. Then they try to cover all of this with a burst of hard work and call themselves committed. They are not committed. They are compensating. There is a difference. The consistent man stops compensating and starts governing. He understands that greatness is not built by periodic rescue operations after repeated self-created messes. Greatness is built by reducing the number of messes that need rescuing in the first place. That is why he values cleanliness of life. Clean speech, clean timing, clean priorities, clean spending, clean relationships, clean thought, clean recovery, clean mornings. This does not make him rigid. It makes him usable. A clean life is easier to direct than a crowded one. A clean mind is easier to focus than a noisy one. A clean schedule is easier to build from than a chaotic one. Order is not decoration. Order is force. Now another thing begins happening as consistency deepens. The man becomes less impressed with how he feels and more interested in what is true. This is a very high form of maturity. The average man still wants his feelings to approve the day before he commits to the day. He wants to feel rested enough, inspired enough, appreciated enough, optimistic enough, emotionally clear enough before he fully gives himself to the task. But a serious man cannot live like that. If he does, his whole future becomes vulnerable to the weather inside him. No, he learns to ask a different question. Not, how do I feel about this, but what is required now? That question removes a great deal of childishness from a life, because much of what we call inconsistency is simply obedience to emotional weather. One day the inner sky is bright, so the man works with force. The next day it is cloudy, so he calls that needing a break. The next day irritation arrives, so he loosens the schedule. The next day self-doubt rises, so he delays the task and calls the delay wisdom. This is not sophistication. This is drift in elegant clothing. The man who wins stops making his standards wait for his feelings to cooperate. He obeys what matters first and lets feelings catch up later if they choose. This is not easy, but it is freeing, because once a man stops needing perfect inner weather, he becomes much harder to stop. He can work while uncertain. He can save while unimpressed. He can practice while bored. He can keep the schedule while tired. He can return after failure without turning failure into a whole identity. This is one of the highest proofs that seriousness has taken root. A man no longer needs emotional ceremony around his duties. He simply does them because this is now how his life operates. And let us be honest, that kind of life carries a certain quiet authority. You can feel it when you meet such a man. He is not always dramatic. He is not always loud. He may not even speak often about what he is building, but there is weight in him because he repeats the right things. He does not have to sell you the idea that he is committed. His order tells the story. His timing tells the story. His speech tells the story. His restraint tells the story. The steadiness of his hand tells the story. That is the power of consistency. It eventually creates evidence so thick that words become less necessary. This is also why consistency is a form of respect. Respect for your own future. Respect for your own calling. Respect for the work. Respect for the people who will someday depend on your strength. Respect for money, for time, for your own mind, for the gift in your hand. Weak men are disrespectful in quiet ways. They arrive late to their own lives. They waste what they say they value. They spend what should be built. They talk when they should be working. They turn every inconvenience into permission. That is all disrespect. The consistent man says, no, this matters too much to be handled carelessly. That sentence changes the whole posture of a life. Now, because all this is true, you must understand that consistency is not the same as intensity repeated. It is something calmer and stronger. Intensity burns hot. Consistency burns long. Intensity may push you through one heroic effort. Consistency turns effort into architecture. A man may build an impressive wall in one burst of energy and then leave it exposed to weather, neglect, and poor materials. Another man lays one good brick at a time, steadily, without noise. Years later, only one of those walls is still standing. That is how life works. The crowd often notices intensity first because it is loud. Reality rewards consistency more because it lasts. This matters especially when the reward is delayed. A man who relies on intensity becomes vulnerable when visible results slow down. He begins needing another emotional jolt to keep himself moving. But the consistent man does not require the reward to speak every week. He has built his life under law. He knows what the day is for. He knows what belongs in the hour. He knows that repeated right action is not wasted even while it is still hidden. This keeps him from growing offended by process. He remains with it. And remaining, more than surging, is what builds things worthy of trust. At this point, consistency also begins cleansing motive. In the beginning, a man may be driven partly by pride, partly by pain, partly by the need to prove something. Fine. Human motives are rarely pure at first. But if he stays in disciplined repetition long enough, the process starts burning away the lighter motives. It asks, will you still do this when no one is impressed? Will you still practice when no one notices? Will you still save when no one praises restraint? Will you still keep your word when there is no applause attached to it? If he says yes enough times, something beautiful happens. The work becomes less about appearance and more about truth, less about drama and more about mastery, less about proving himself and more about actually becoming trustworthy. This is where consistency becomes almost sacred. It is no longer just a productivity tool. It becomes a purifier. It removes vanity. It weakens the appetite for constant praise. It exposes what was merely emotional in your ambition. It turns your relationship with the future from fantasy into stewardship. You begin feeling less like a dreamer and more like a builder. That is one of the finest feelings in the world, not because it flatters pride, but because it steadies the soul. A builder knows what today is for. He does not need constant signs. He needs his tools and his law. Now here is a truth many do not want to hear. If you are not consistent, you are still in love with the wrong thing. Perhaps the wrong thing is comfort. Perhaps it is praise. Perhaps it is excitement. Perhaps it is the pleasure of beginning. Perhaps it is the freedom to keep options open. But something still holds more authority than the result you claim to want. Because if the result truly held first place, your life would begin shaping itself more seriously around what that result requires. This is not said to condemn. It is said to expose. Once the wrong loyalty is exposed, it can be broken. Until then, the man keeps calling himself serious while his repetition keeps proving otherwise. So look at your patterns honestly, not your ideals, not your intentions, your patterns. What have you repeated enough that it now shapes the tone of your days? What gets done whether you feel like it or not? What gets sacrificed first when pressure enters? What survives the loss of excitement? What returns after a bad day? These answers tell you who is really in charge. They tell you whether seriousness has become law or whether it still depends too much on emotional weather. And if the answers sting, use them. Do not dramatize. Do not collapse. Do not turn insight into another speech about how you need to do better. Build one stronger pattern. Protect one stronger hour. Keep one promise longer than before. Shorten the distance between a weak moment and your return to order. That is how consistency grows. Not through grand reinvention, but through fewer breaks in the chain, through more loyalty to what matters, through enough repeated obedience that the life begins carrying a different sound. That different sound is unmistakable. It is the sound of a man who can be trusted. Trusted by his own conscience, trusted by opportunity, trusted by those around him, trusted by the future. Because the future does not lean heavily on men who are still built on emotional weather. It leans on men who can remain, men who can repeat, men whose seriousness is not a speech but a pattern. That is why consistency is the proof. It tells the truth long before results become obvious enough for everyone else to see. So now the question becomes painfully simple. What in your life still depends too much on feeling? What standard still bends when the mood changes? What discipline still collapses when no one is watching? What promise still sounds noble in your mouth but weak in your repetition? Find that, and you will find the next doorway of growth. Because The life you say you want will never be built on occasional greatness. It will be built on repeated faithfulness, on the days that feel strong and on the days that feel plain, on the mornings that inspire and on the mornings that simply ask for law. This is the final mercy in consistency. It frees you from needing every day to feel meaningful in order for the day to matter. You stop asking for emotional reward before obedience. You stop treating repetition like punishment. You begin understanding that a life becomes great not because every day felt grand, but because enough days were handled with respect. Respect for the standard. Respect for the work. Respect for the future. Respect for the law. And the man who learns that no longer needs to wonder whether he is serious. His repetition has already answered for him. And once a man has lived long enough under right repetition, he discovers the final and perhaps most demanding lesson of all. Consistency is not only what builds success, it is what protects success from being stolen by the very weaknesses that once kept it far away. Many men learn how to become disciplined when pain is sharp. Few learn how to remain disciplined when progress begins easing the pain. That is where the deeper test begins. The first test was whether you could start. The second was whether you could continue when the work felt ordinary. But the fourth test is whether you can stay exact after some reward finally appears. Can you keep the same laws when life begins smiling a little? Can you remain governed when the emergency has passed? Can you still be serious after the first signs of movement arrive and the old hunger quiets down just enough to make softness feel harmless again? This is where many lose the ground they fought so hard to gain. They become disciplined enough to escape chaos, then careless enough to invite chaos back in through a side door. They protect the morning for a season, then begin selling pieces of it because things are going better now. They tighten the budget until margin finally appears, then start spending as though margin means the old weakness can be trusted. They sharpen their focus until momentum begins building, then let small distractions parade through the day as if nothing serious is at stake anymore. They become more consistent, yes, but then they mistake early progress for permanent strength. That mistake is expensive. Progress is not proof that the war is over. It is proof that the principles are working. And if the principles are working, they must be protected more carefully and not less. That is why consistency must mature into guardianship. At first, it is enough to repeat what is right. Later, you must also defend it. You must become the keeper of your own structure, the keeper of your first hour, the keeper of your standards, the keeper of the calm you have fought to earn, the keeper of the money that now has order, the keeper of the habits that once felt unnatural and now are finally beginning to feel like your own. Weak men think discipline is a ladder you throw away once you reach the roof. Strong men understand it is the framework that keeps the whole building from collapsing. Now let us speak directly. Some of the most dangerous words in any successful season are these: I can relax now. Not rest wisely. That is necessary. Not recover intelligently. That is honorable. Relax the law. Relax the vigilance. Relax the structure. Relax the exactness. That is where decay begins. Because the lower self does not always return as open rebellion. More often it returns as a polite suggestion. You have earned this. You have proved enough. One loose day will not matter. You can handle a little drift now. You are not the old person anymore. Notice what is happening. The lower self is using your progress as an argument against the very habits that produce the progress. If you are not watchful, you will listen. And if you listen, the decline rarely begins loudly. It begins in tone. Your mornings lose sharpness. Your standards become negotiable. Your speech becomes looser. Your spending gets a little more emotional. Your appetite gets a little more of a vote. You become slightly more available to distraction, slightly more indulgent with excuses, slightly less reverent toward what once kept you strong. These small shifts do not look dramatic. That is why they are dangerous. Men expect collapse to arrive with thunder. Often it arrives like dust settling slowly on furniture nobody's bothered to clean in a while. This is why the serious man becomes a student not only of progress, but of decline. He learns the first signs of drift. He knows where his edge starts dulling. He knows what thoughts precede softness. He knows what kinds of fatigue make him vulnerable to convenience. He knows what forms of praise make him less careful. He knows which people, settings, habits, and little permissions tend to lower his standard. This knowledge is not fear. It is wisdom. A ruler who knows where the city wall is weakest is not living in paranoia. He is living in stewardship. So stewardship becomes the next name for consistency. At first, consistency is the proof that you are serious. Later, consistency becomes the proof that you are trustworthy. Trustworthy with more work, more room, more money, more influence, more opportunity, more peace. A man who cannot maintain the simple disciplines that built his first progress is not yet trustworthy with larger rewards. Why? Because larger rewards create larger temptations. More money gives vanity more tools. More success gives pride more reasons to speak. More options create more chances to scatter. More praise gives self-deception a sweeter voice. If the man has not built a deep loyalty to law, the very things he once prayed for may become the things that expose him. This is why maturity means becoming less impressed by what is visible and more devoted to what is structural. The immature man says, "Look how far I have come." The mature man says, "What must still be guarded?" The immature man uses success to congratulate himself. The mature man uses success to deepen his respect for the disciplines that carried him. The immature man sees early fruit and assumes the roots no longer need attention. The mature man sees early fruit and becomes more loyal to the roots. That loyalty is what separates the man who touches success from the man who keeps it. And now the idea of keeping becomes very important. It is one thing to build momentum. It is another thing to remain a man momentum can trust. That is not a poetic line. It is a practical reality. A life that gets stronger through consistency develops momentum almost naturally. Repetition sharpens craft, preserves money, deepens trust, cleans up the mind, strengthens the body, and gives direction to time. Fine. But once momentum arrives, the man must know how to live inside it without becoming intoxicated by it. He must not start talking more than working. He must not start spending more than building. He must not start admiring the identity of being serious more than he continues doing the plain acts that made him serious. This is where humility becomes a protective force. Not false humility, not shrinking language, real humility. Real humility remembers what built the life. It remembers the hidden mornings, the repeated refusals, the budget that no one saw, the plain work, the lonely discipline, the long seasons when there was more law than applause. A humble man honors those things. He does not begin acting like the visible result somehow replaced the need for the invisible disciplines. He knows better. He knows the roof still stands because the beams are strong, not because the paint looks good in sunlight. That is why visible improvement should always make you more sober, not more loose. If the work is finally growing, protect the routine more carefully. If the money is finally stabilizing, direct it more carefully. If your name is beginning to carry trust, speak more carefully. If your influence is expanding, choose your company more carefully. If your peace is stronger, guard your mind more carefully. Increase should deepen reverence, not weaken it. That is the law. Any other response is a slow invitation to decline. Now, another thing begins happening in this stage. The man who has practiced consistency long enough becomes less dependent on emotional rewards. This is one of the finest freedoms in the world. He no longer needs to feel like every day is dramatic in order to respect the day. He no longer needs visible wins every week in order to keep building. He no longer needs other people to notice his effort in order to remain loyal to it. Why? Because consistency has shifted him from emotional living into structural living. He has seen too much evidence. He knows what repeated obedience does. He knows what small leaks cost. He knows what ordinary law can build. This knowledge frees him from needing constant excitement. And once he no longer needs constant excitement, his life becomes much more stable. Stability is one of the hidden treasures of disciplined living. The crowd often admires intensity and overlooks stability. But stability is what makes a man able to carry serious responsibilities without becoming emotionally brittle. Stability is what allows him to think clearly in difficulty, to handle growth without panic, to keep standards in success and in silence, to move without needing every season to flatter him. Stability is a form of power because it reduces waste, less emotional waste, less money waste, less time waste, less recovery from avoidable chaos. Over years, that reduction in waste becomes one of the greatest advantages a man can possess. Now let us speak of waste in the advanced stage, because it changes form. At the beginning, waste is obvious. Lost hours, weak habits, poor spending, chaotic living. Later, waste often appears as overexpansion. Too many opportunities accepted, too many conversations entertained, too many commitments added too quickly, too much confidence in one's capacity to carry more before the present structure is fully hardened. This is where consistency must become selective. The man says, "Not everything that can be done should be done by me now." That is wisdom. He begins protecting focus against success itself. He realizes that opportunity, unmanaged, can become another form of distraction. This is one reason successful lives often look simpler from the inside than people expect. The serious man cuts more as he grows. He narrows. He ranks. He guards depth. He understands that what got him here cannot be abandoned in the name of enlargement. He knows that expansion without structure becomes noise, and noise is the enemy of consistency. So he learns to say no even to some good things. Not because they are evil, but because they are out of order. That is a high form of discipline. It means a man is no longer living to gratify his ego with constant enlargement. He is living to preserve what is central. What is central must always be protected. If the central work made the life stronger, protect it. If the central routine gave the day direction, protect it. If the central standard cleaned up your speech, your money, your body, your mind, protect it. Do not let secondary things, even attractive ones, overrun the core. This is one way success gets stolen from people who look strong from the outside. They let the side roads become as crowded as the main road. Then the main thing starts starving. The strongest men do not let that happen. They know what the life is built around, and they keep honoring that order. Now there is one more great enemy in this stage: sentimentality toward your old self. A man begins doing well, and because pain is not as sharp as it once was, he starts remembering the old weak life too gently. He begins flirting with old habits, old company, old indulgences, old rhythms, old forms of drift. He tells himself he can handle it now. That is sentimentality. It forgets what those things cost. It forgets the chaos, the waste, the shame, the leakage, the internal division they produced. The serious man refuses this kind of nostalgia. He does not hate his past, but he does not romanticize what once weakened him either. He remembers with enough clarity that he no longer finds old chains charming. This matters because the lower life often returns disguised as familiarity. It feels easy. It feels known. It feels like relief. But relief from discipline is often just re-entry into weakness. The stronger man knows this, so he stays awake. Not rigidly, not fearfully, but soberly. He keeps his gains clean. He respects the cost of collapse too much to play games with things that once nearly ruled him. That is not bondage. It is freedom defended. And now we come to the final shape of this lesson. Consistency is not only the proof that you are serious. It becomes the evidence that you can be trusted with success after it comes. It proves that your seriousness was not a season, not a performance, not a response to pain alone, not a desperate reaction to a bad chapter. It proves that seriousness became law. It proves that your better life is not hanging on emotion. It proves that your standards can survive ordinary days, slow progress, and visible increase. It proves that you are not merely someone who wanted something badly once. You are someone who built a way of living strong enough to keep carrying what matters. That is rare. Rare enough that the world almost always recognizes it eventually, even if it cannot explain why such a person feels substantial. The answer is simple. He stayed. He repeated. He guarded. He refined. He did not start over every week. He did not turn every stumble into a collapse. He did not allow success to soften him. He did not allow delay to sour him. He became a keeper of law. And because he became a keeper of law, the life itself began carrying a different tone, more peace, more force, more direction, more trust, more depth. So now, as this part closes, let the challenge come directly. If your life has improved, what are you doing to protect the source of that improvement? If your habits are stronger, what keeps them from loosening? If your money is cleaner, what protects it from emotional drift? If your mind is calmer, what boundaries preserve that peace? If your standard is stronger, what little compromises still threaten it? Do not ask these questions once and move on. Live with them, because the man who asks them regularly will keep himself close to what matters. And the man who stays close to what matters long enough will not merely build success. He will become the kind of man success can safely remain with.